So, in today's video, we are talking about progressing in rehab for hikers. And specifically, what we're going to be talking about is a few things that you may want to consider. If you're going through a bit of a recovery or rehab journey and you feel like things are just not really progressing in the way that you want, and you're really trying to get back out on the trail and hiking as smoothly as possible. Now, this particular video was coming from a question we got sent through in our Training for Hiking community group. And to read out the question and give you context around what we're talking about is what the question was the area that I have problems with is the right side of my glute. It feels like it pinches at certain times. After about 3 to 4 kilometers, it starts to ache. I've recently got some hiking poles and it does seem to be helping on the uphills a little bit. And I've been working with a physio doing strength exercises and dry needling. But sometimes it feels like it's not really going anywhere. Now, for the strength exercises, when we dove into it, the answer was they were doing some bridges, some squats, some calf raises, some single leg side lifts, and a bit of balancing on one leg. It's been changed and tweaked a little bit, but they're typically doing it about 6 to 7 times a week. Takes about 30 minutes. On top of that, doing a little bit of walking a couple of times a week and relatively active. Now, in this type of situation, it's a really, really, really common thing we hear from hikers who have an issue. They go see a physio, they get a bunch of exercises, they're doing these exercises, but things just don't seem to move forward. So we're going to talk through a few ideas to consider here. Now, to be really, really clear before we do get into things, it is not my place in this type of format to give specific recommendations for any type of rehab. It's not my place to say, hey, you've got this particular ache, pain, or injury, and this is exactly what you should be doing. That's not what this is about. What we're going to be doing is just talking through some general ideas, which may be very worthwhile considering if you fall into a similar situation like this, which you can either consider for yourself or have a chat with your physio or health professional about. So, coming into this, if you are a hiker and you do realize that an ache or pain or injury is holding back your hiking, we really do want to ensure that our rehab and our recovery aligns with what we actually need. What I mean by this is there is often a big gap between getting the body just comfortable for day-to-day life. And this is typically what the majority of rehab or recovery programs are about. There's a bit of difference between that and actually getting the body ready for being out on the trail. Because there's a big difference from just walking around the local neighborhood or walking around the shops to actually going out on the trail, going up and down hills on rougher terrain or whatever it may be. And this particular gap, which we often call the gap between rehab and performance, this is typically where we fall into, where we just feel like we're just not getting any progress. Because we're doing all this rehab, we start to feel better, we go out on the trail and the pain's still there. And we just keep on going and going and going, and it really does feel like we're never really getting anywhere. If we're a hiker, we need to think about this in a little bit more detail, and we need to ensure that whatever recovery, whatever rehab we're doing is respecting what we need as a hiker. Now, for hikers, in the majority of rehab or recovery journeys, if we're looking to get back out on the trail, we want to make sure we are covering a few things. Number one, as in any type of rehab journey, we want to make sure we're removing, reducing, or controlling aggravating issues. So if there's certain things that are causing you pain, we want to make sure we're adjusting these, we're tweaking these, we're managing these, so we're not continually aggravating ourselves. Number two, we want to build up strength in the supporting muscles and the supporting areas of the body. There is so much evidence to say strengthening can be super beneficial in so many different aches, pains, and injuries. We definitely want to be doing this. On top of this, as a hiker, we want to make sure that we are exposing the body and exposing our specific issues to the very particular challenges that it's going to face on the trail. But doing it in a way where we're not just going out and hiking and throwing ourselves in the deep end and continually getting uncomfortable, but do this in a way that is controllable and that is manageable. So we can slowly introduce this to our body and make the body a little bit happier with this. And then finally, we want to make sure we're managing hiking loads, meaning we're being very, very intentional around how much walking, how much hiking we're doing, and how quickly we ramp things up. So to explore things a little bit, let's touch on strength to start. Now, there is so much I could go into in regards to strength training for, pain and injury prevention. But to keep things simple, there's really two big principles we want to keep top of mind whenever we're looking at strength training. Number one is we want to make sure we're doing well-structured training. So what this means is, a lot of people with their rehab or their recovery, they'll just do one or two exercises. They'll say, hey, I've got this issue. Someone will say, hey, just do this one exercise. You'll be all good. Typically, it tends to be a bit more complex than that. And to get the best results, we want to make sure we are working the body as a whole, or at the very, very least, working the legs as a whole if it is a lower limb issue. So in this particular situation, we were sort of saying, hey, they were doing bridges, which work the glutes and the hamstrings, squats, which work the quadriceps, calf raises, which work the calves, side leg lifts, which works the glute medius, and balancing on one leg, which works the ankles, and also a bit of balance. That's kind of covering quite a few bases. So that's pretty good. You could definitely add other bits and pieces in here, but that's a pretty good start. Now, the other principle we do need to consider, and one thing that often does get missed, is we do need to ensure that we are doing progressive overload. In the sense that when we're looking at any type of strengthening program, the body will get used to things relatively quickly. In order for us to continually improve it, to build up our strength, to help our resilience, and help us get on top of these issues, we want to ensure bit by bit by bit, we're adding a little bit extra challenge. Maybe we're adding some extra weight, maybe we're making more difficult exercises, or whatever it may be. And every few weeks, we're making things a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder. We often find when we're working in these rehab programs, we get given a set of exercises, and someone will end up doing them for 2 or 3 or 4 months at a time, or just indefinitely. Not amazing. In this particular situation, I'm not 100% sure how things are progressing, didn't get that context, but just ask yourself, am I doing some type of progression? Over time, are we making things a bit more challenging? Are we making things a bit harder? If not, that's probably now where we want to look at. The next thing we want to consider, as we sort of said before, is when we're looking at filling this gap between typical rehab and what we need for hiking, we want to expose the body to the specific challenges it's going to face. Typically, when we're thinking about hiking, there are a few particular things which are kind of common triggers in regards to discomfort and common things that often get people feeling a bit uncomfortable. First of all, distance. Typically, a lot of people will sort of find that, hey, I'm fine to hike for a certain amount of time, and then there's a certain time period where aches and pains begin to creep up. In this particular situation, they mentioned that about 3 to 4 kilometers, they got uncomfortable. So in our head, we want to think about, okay, if that's the time that we begin to get a little bit painful, a little bit uncomfortable, what can we do to slowly increase the tolerance there? Number 2, a common trigger is elevation. Going up or downhill, very, 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 very challenging in a number of ways, and this can often be a trigger. Again, in this particular situation, they mention uphills can tend to be a bit of a trigger, so we want to think about, okay, how can we train that? Another typical trigger is pack weight. Now, this wasn't mentioned in this particular thing, but pretty much every single hiker will be going out with some type of pack. Now, it doesn't always have to be a full pack, but even if you're just carrying a light day pack with a bottle of water and a bit of snacks, it might just be 2 kilos, that is extra challenge. That needs to be respected, and we need to be aware of this in our recovery process. And one also that often catches people up is speed. In the sense, if you go out hiking regularly with people who are a bit quicker than you, or whatever it may be, this can often be a trigger. So if that's the situation, we need to prepare for that. So now we've got these ideas around these common specific triggers. There's often obviously a lot of other things out there in everyone's individual situations, but there's some pretty common ones. So now we want to ask ourselves, during our training, how can we expose the body to these things so we can slowly and surely build up the body's tolerance to these things so we can be more comfortable and won't aggravate our issues on the trail, and slowly expose ourselves in a way which is not going to aggravate the area and is controllable. So it's not just, say, going out and hiking every single week and just doing these massive hills and be like, oh my gosh, I'm super uncomfortable, but it's doing it in a way where we can control it, we can gently dose it in and slowly give the body the chance to get better at it. So on the distance side of things, if we're in the situation where like, okay, after 3 to 4 kilometers, it gets a little bit uncomfortable, well, what can we do? I would typically recommend sitting down and creating a bit of a plan for your walking, for your hiking, where we can say, you know what, I'm going to start at a distance which is comfortable. I'm going to start at a distance that doesn't aggravate things. I'm going to start at something that feels good. And then I'm going to create a plan where week by week by week, I make it just a little bit harder, a little bit harder, a little bit harder, and make it a little bit longer, and slowly and gradually push that distance out. On the elevation side of things, we want to think about, okay, how can I expose the body to this in a way that is controllable? How can I practice this type of thing? Typically, this may involve, doing a bit of stair or hill climbing, finding a local set of stairs, finding a local hill, and essentially finding an amount of that where we can go up and down, finding an amount of that which is manageable and which is comfortable. So it's not just doing it till you're absolutely in pain and agony, but starting off at a point which is very, really comfortable and slowly building up. For me, some of the hikers that I've worked with previously, they've had issues where literally after 5 minutes of climbing, like going up and down, up and down, up and down, they're like, hey, the pain's starting to kind of come on. So we're like, okay, if the pain's coming on at 5 minutes, maybe we'll just start off with 3 minutes of this. Then next week we'll do 4 minutes. Then next week we'll do 5 minutes. Then next week we'll do 6 minutes. And we'll slowly and gradually build that up. It can sometimes be a very, very slow thing, but it's pretty necessary because we can't really avoid ups and downs when we're hiking. Same thing for pack weight. Is there a way that we can slowly introduce weight to the body in a way that is controllable to help our body better tolerate this? The typical way of going about this is just doing some loaded pack walking around the local neighborhood. Start off with a weight which is comfortable, which is easy, which is very, very gentle. And then week by week, just add a little bit more, a little bit more, a little bit more. And we're doing this around the local neighborhood. So it's a way that if something goes wrong, we can just take the pack off and go home or whatever it may be. Very, very simple. And then speed, if speed is a factor in your particular situation, then we may want to have a think about, okay, how can we practice this? And again, this may involve neighborhood walking where we're just slowly building up speed or whatever it may be. Now, for all this type of stuff, for this particular question, I can't give specific recommendations around start at this and build this up and do this because everyone's going to be very individual and we need a lot more context, a lot more information from every single individual before we actually give particular recommendations. But hopefully this kind of gets the thoughts turning where you can think about, okay, these are things I need to prepare for hiking. How can I incorporate that in my training and slowly build it up? Now, on top of that, this won't be everyone, but if you are a hiker where you have a long-term goal in your sights, and I think the person asking this particular question does have a particular hike they're training for, then it's definitely worthwhile sitting down and spending a bit of time charting out a bit of a long-term plan around how you're going to approach all of this. Because if you have, say, your hike in 6 months' time, it can be very, very worthwhile sitting down and just having a really, really rough plan around, okay, over these months, how am I going to build things up? Over these months, how am I going to introduce these things so I can be confident that by 6 months, I'm going to be ready? And this can take a lot of the stress out where we're just thinking, oh my gosh, nothing's going forward, I'm not progressing, whatever it may be. But having a really rough plan can go a long way. So you want to sit down and think about, okay, how can I progress my walking, my hiking? What can I do now, which is comfortable? And over the months, how can I slowly build this up to get me where I need to be for my trip? Ask yourself, how are you going to approach your cardio? How are you going to approach the pack walking or the stair climbing or the hill climbing or whatever it may be? How are you going to do this and slowly build it up over time? Do you have the knowledge and or support to progress your strength over time? If you have a good set of exercises or a good workout right now, do you know how you're going to step by step build it up? Or at least you have someone in your corner who can help you with that. And then also, we want it when we're doing all of this. The value of this long-term planning is it allows us to find the balance between ensuring that we ultimately just have everything we need to fitting in everything we need by our leave date. And we want to make sure we're sort of building this out in the slowest possible way. So if you have 6 months time to build up, you can sort of say, okay, I'm going to be really, really gentle, really, really slow with the intention of covering all of this stuff by the end of a 6-month period. Because the slower you can go with this type of stuff, the better. Now, obviously, for me, my situation, I do this every day. This is my job. This is my full-time job. And, these plans, it makes sense to me. For you, just listening to this, you might be like, okay, theoretically, Rowan, this makes sense, but you may sit down, pen and paper, and be like, okay, how do I go about this? And it can be a little bit overwhelming. But in all honesty, it doesn't have to be complicated, even if you have the most simple plan at all. And you say, you know what, month 1, I'm just going to do normal walking. Month 2, I'm going to do pack walking. Month 3, I'm going to do stair climbing. Month 4, I'm going to do stair climbing the pack. Whatever it is, something really, really simple like that, it can be really useful. And then on top of that is if you are going through a bit of a recovery period or a rehab journey, and say you're covering your strength, say you're covering your, hiking specific stuff, say you've got that long-term build, that's all really, really good stuff. But there's definitely a lot of other areas which you can consider and put a bit of attention into, which can make a pretty big difference in regards to keeping comfortable and avoiding pain and injury on the trail. So to very briefly go over these things, I won't go into a huge amount of detail, but very briefly, fatigue management. Fatigue is a risk factor when it comes down to the presentation of pain on the trail. So what can we do to manage that? Learning pacing strategies, figuring out our nutrition, figuring out our hydration, making sure we're on top of each of these areas can go a long way. Stress can be a factor in regards to the presentation of pain. So having to think about what can I do to manage stress and manage emotions in my day-to-day life if I live a stressful life or I have a stressful job. And also when you're actually out on the trail, if you're getting into situations which feel a bit scary or if you're a little bit worried about your the pain flaring up or whatever it may be, do you have strategies you can fall back on to help with that? Do you have pain management strategies? What do you do if the pain starts to creep up? Do you have a range of strategies that you can play around with both on and off the trail to help? On the gear side of things, making sure your pack is fit correctly, even if you're only using a day pack, making sure that's sorted. Trekking poles are great, and in this situation, this person was using them. Have you got them? Are you using them? Are you confident in your technique? And then are you looking at recovery? Are you doing certain things to help the body bounce back and recover in between days of training? And also, if you're out hiking, what can you do in between days of hiking? I won't go into the specifics of all of this stuff because we'll be talking about hours and hours and hours, but all of these things are definitely worthwhile considering and they can play into the whole situation of pain management. So, coming off the back of this, in this particular situation, what my recommendations would be to kind of work through this is if you're working with a physio, I would sit down and just have a chat with them and just sort of say, like, hey, lay it on the table and say, look, I know we've been going through this process, but I just want to be clear that one of my priorities is I want to be able to hike this amount of distance with this amount of pack weight without pain at this date, if you have a particular date. Just lay it out, be really, really clear. This is the end goal. Can you help me towards this? And can we ensure that I'm not just ready just to walk around the shops, but I can actually go out and do this? If they say yes, awesome, happy days. You can work together and collaborate together. Admittedly, sometimes it may involve you actually having to sit down and do a session with them and pain a session with them where you literally don't do anything but talk. But if in that situation, that can be really worthwhile. Sometimes you'll have this conversation and you won't really get the response you want. Sometimes you sort of say, yeah, yeah, yeah. And they'll just sort of kind of say, okay, just keep on doing what you're doing. And you're like, well, it's not really changing. Or maybe they'll sort of like, be like, actually, no, I can't really help you with this. Just do this or whatever it may be. So if you don't really get the answer you want, then there's a few different other routes you can go down. One option is you can find a physio who may be just a different physio. Typically, if you can go down the route of someone who specializes in sports, and even better if someone sort of in their bio, in their sort of about me page or whatever, says they work with runners or other endurance athletes, because typically it's very hard to find someone who works with hikers specifically. But if you can find someone who works with runners or endurance athletes, have a chat with them and say, look, this is the end goal, that can often be a good step. Alternatively, if you're kind of working with your physio and you're happy with what you're doing, but you just want to explore these other areas, then just have a think about, okay, those other bits and pieces we covered before, what can you do to help plan that out just to complement what you're doing with your physio? So you've got the two different tracks, but they're kind of going together. Or if you're in the situation where you're like, you know what, I just don't know how to do this for myself, I don't know how to put this together, whatever it may be, then you may want to find some support in another direction to help with your preparations and complement what you're doing with the physio. Work with a coach, work with a trainer, work with another professional to kind of cover all those other bases and help put everything together for you. So definitely having a conversation with the physio will go a long way. Now, on top of that, absolutely create a hiking walking plan and stick with it. Really, really goes a long way. Just sitting down, just saying, hey, week by week or month by month, this is kind of what I'm going to do to slowly build things up. And then on top of that, it's definitely worthwhile just start researching these other areas that I mentioned before and see what you can improve. What can you do for pacing? Are you confident you know what you're doing there? If not, research it. Are you confident you know what you're best to do in nutrition to help manage your energy? All of these bits and pieces I mentioned, you've got a little checklist where you can say, I don't know anything about that. Now's the time to explore. And the good thing about those types of things is not only can they be beneficial to a pain or recovery journey, but they also can be really beneficial for your hiking in a number of ways regardless. So when you are in this type of situation where you're working with a health professional, you're going through a recovery period, and maybe things aren't just going forward in the way you want for your hiking specifically, just ask yourself the question, is what I'm doing going to get me ready for the trail? Am I confident that not only is this going to get me ready for day-to-day life, but I can visually see that if I need to go out and climb a hill for 20 minutes, if I need to carry a pack, if I need to go out and do multiple days, I can kind of see how I'm preparing my body for. If you can't see it, then there's a few ideas in there in regards to how you can fill those gaps. Now, as I said before, I can't unfortunately give you specifics in this type of situation, in this format, without knowing a huge amount of extra context or whatever it may be. But hopefully that does help, and hopefully that gives a few insights there. So, with that being said, I'm going to wrap things up here. I hope that makes sense. I hope it sort of opens a few avenues for some people who may be in a similar situation, because this is something that I see week after week after week after week from hikers all around the world. And it is something that's just not much fun. But the good news is if you can do the right things to kind of fill this gap a little bit, can really go a long way to helping you feel much more comfortable on your adventures. Plus, really beneficial just for generally improving your fitness, your strength, your endurance as well. So any questions of that, please let me know. But hopefully that makes sense and hopefully that helps a few people.